Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. Welcome back to Chasing Legends. I'm Wayne Tuttle, your host once again. Please hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave comments. We read the comments, we check them out. I actually am the person that does it personally myself. Check out our website at legendthesuperstitionmountains.com. At this point in time, we should have up out there streaming Sunsets, so go check out Amazon or any place you can find streaming and see if you can catch it. Excellent film. The Rendezvous is past. We will talk about it in the future because it is in the future from when I'm speaking to you. Pretty nifty stuff, time travel. That being said and done, let's get to today's subject because it's the end of the spooky stories. Yes. We're done with October at this point. We're heading into Halloween and we'll be done. We might do a couple more coming down into the fall because I don't have any Christmas stories, so might as well do something like that, huh? Makes sense to me. Anyways, this story is going to begin and then end differently with a bit of a discussion. It's the last one we have for October at this time, and I wanted it to be a little different than the others. We're going to go back in time because we are back in time here. Even though I'm doing this for forward in time, this is way back in time, probably 1995-96, and I'm working at Shuck & Sons Construction. Now, down there, I worked in what was called the door and trim department for the construction company in the West Valley. And the door and trim department was a large building. You had an interior door department. You had a hardware department. I worked in the hardware department in the yard. I also worked hardware in the field, and I also worked trim in the field, but most of my time spent with Shuck. I was part of the exterior door division and that department. It was very separate. We had another additional large building that had doors, the slabs of doors. The stuff I worked with was what you would be the fire-rated doors going into your garage, not the interior to your house, but entry doors. We'd work with 4-foot by 8-foot oak doors, and I would dap and hinge those and bore them, and that's, well, it's kind of boring, but yeah, that's what I did. I worked in the exterior door department. Adjacent to this, across the way, they weren't in the same building as us, was the exterior metal door department. They did exterior metal doors. I think they had some interior stuff, but most of it, they do commercial stuff. They had a nice, large open area in their building. It was a big rectangular shop, and to kind of set it up, they had their desks and the area they generally worked in on the eastern end of the building. But on the western end of that section of the building, they had a number of machines that they used for machining and working on the door frames. So both departments worked together. We were both exterior doors, so they would have slabs they would need hinge dapped and work done to, and I would do those for them. And then at the other side is for a lot of your entry doors that have cutouts, like have windows and kind of inserts into them, we had to cut those out. And the exterior metal door shop had the machine that cut them out. One of the problems is they would put a new bit in because they're working with metal doors, so they didn't like us using their new bits. So we tried to coordinate with them so that when they got a new bit in the machine, we kind of got our stuff out of the way with the old bit or changed the bit out for them. The guys working back there were Richard and Dan, and I think Brad was then. Later, I know Chris worked with them. My cousin worked back there, was treated very well. And I think Jeff did too back there with them. But anyways, Richard was back there almost the duration and all. Usually my interaction was with Richard. Good dude. In fact, Richard's dad was my boss up in the front for our department when I came to work there. And he was one of my better bosses in my life. Good guy, great guy. Moving forward though, I would go in there and then occasionally Richard would say, get someone to unlock the door, go in the shop and go use it in the morning so we wouldn't step on each other because we had to interrupt our own production or whatever we're doing to do the other guy's stuff. So Richard would have stuff he needed done, and I'd always try to, because I'd have to, everything on the machinery we use, you'd have to change all the bits and stuff. It was a pain. So I would always try to accommodate him. And at the same time, Richard tried to always let me know where they were at and what was going on back there. And Dan did as well. Well, there was a certain point where Richard was like, they were very busy. And he said, why don't you come in just early? And when you come in, go back and cut out the inserts. Because when my guys would do it, they would leave a mess and stuff. And he just said, you know what? I didn't mind doing them. I didn't care. So it was like, when you get in early, if you want to, just cut it out. So I was like, okay. Or later in the day, they'd be done and gone. So I went in there a couple times, and I was back there by myself. And I went in, and I remember going back to the machine. It was on that western end. And it's a loud machine, and you're cutting out these inserts, and I'm working on the door. And I realized someone's standing here to the side of me. And I figured it's Richard, who probably came into work, or Dan, or Brad. And I turned to say something to him and realized there's nobody there. And I'm looking around, and I'm going, I saw someone there. I know I saw someone. And I'm just looking around and thinking, that's so weird. And you're in this big, long room. The room had to be 30, 40 feet wide, but probably close to 100 feet long. So, and I only turned on the lights I needed, so it's like dark, and I'm looking around like, what? So I went back to work, and it wasn't after a while I realized I thought I saw movement and someone come, and I thought, okay, it's Richard. And then I turned, and then I tried to figure out how he was there, wasn't, and all that. Kind of blew it off, just finished my work, kind of like, man, what the hell was that about? And left. Well, later I talked to him, and I said, hey, I thought you came in. It was really weird. I could have swore you walked up and were standing next to me, so I stopped to turn to talk to you, and you weren't there. And Richard said, yeah, it's a weird thing over there. And what happened is all of them had experienced it, because I talked to all of them about it. They would be working back in that corner, and they would have realized someone's standing there, something turned, and nobody's there. And they would talk about it. And even sometimes when someone was working the back, they'd see someone walking, and they'd look up thinking one of them was crossing over or going somewhere, and they'd look up and realize there was nobody there in the room. It was kind of weird. I know a couple of them, I don't know if Richard really cared, but a couple of them didn't care for working back there by themselves. It kind of was odd. I told one or two of my guys at first, and then I quit because they started getting spooked out by it too. Because almost anyone that went back there by themselves would eventually have that of like, see this shadow shape, and you see the movement and stuff. I thought it was very interesting. The interesting part about the story is we all have that. We're sitting on our couch, we see someone walk through the other room, we look over and realize nobody's home. What was that? And we see it all the time throughout our lives. We're walking by something, or you're in bed and you look over and you think someone walked by the door, and I'm thinking, did one of the kids get out of bed? And I get up and check the house. They're all sound asleep. And I'm just like, what's going on? Why am I seeing shadows and movement? Is this ghosts? What the hell am I seeing? And people talk about shadow people. Well, now we'll go into the other part of our story, because that's a pretty common occurrence. A lot of people have talked about it. I've heard people tell stories. It was years later I found this information. There's two scientists. One's name is Vic Tandy. He's a professor. And the other one was Dr. Tony Lawrence. And he obviously has a doctorate. And they were working in a lab together. And after they'd been working for a while, they started realizing they were having problems of seeing someone out of the corner of their eye turn and nobody was there. They started feeling short-tempered with each other, kind of like uneasiness and stuff. So they started trying to work more separately, because they were thinking, well, the other guy's just driving me crazy. And then they realized they kept having these problems. Vic Tandy spoke quite a bit about it, saying I would see something, it would be a shadow, and like someone was coming into my view, coming around, and then I'd turn and realize nobody's there. They didn't know what to think about it. There's nothing you can do about it. Other people had experienced some things in the room. Well, Vic Tandy worked as a fencer, not worked, but had the hobby as a fencer. And he had an épée, the sword for fencing. And he had brought it in to do some fine tuning on it, grinding on it to balance it right. And he put it in a vise and was working on it. And he turned away and came back and noticed he could tell, because they're very thin, fine metal, it was vibrating. And he watched it for a while, and then he stopped it from vibrating, released it, made sure it was not vibrating, and watched it for a while and watched it start vibrating again. And he realized there's an oscillation, something in the room that's causing this to vibrate. And he found it very interesting. He told Dr. Tony Lawrence, and they both became particularly interested. There's sound waves, vibrations oscillating through the room that's causing things. They searched it out and found it was actually a fan in the room that had a bad bearing, and the oscillation was at, I believe it was 17 hertz. Now, below 20 hertz, we can't hear these things, so it was something they could not hear. But around 17, 18 hertz is what they say the vibration, that natural vibration that's in your eyes. So they realized what's possibly happening, and they began experimenting on the fact that their eyes were vibrating and creating these shadow people and these things from the oscillation in the room. There was a paper written in 1998 by Tandy and Lawrence called Ghost in the Machine, and that was the first I'd ever heard of it. And they did a study on it and said scientifically this is probably explains. Now Tandy went on and did a lot of ghost research. He would go to places and check places for different sound waves that could possibly be causing those things in places. He said he felt it explained about 80 to 90% of a lot of ghost hauntings, the feelings, the shadow people, and things like that. His research passed on, and I think it was a Dr. Richard Wiseman who later carried it on and had a study. And this is around 2003. And in his study, he took two groups, and he had them both sit in a room. One had 17 hertz in the program they were listening. The other didn't. The group that didn't had no issues or problems. But the other group, about 50% of them, started feeling uneasy, depressed, having nausea, and some of them actually started to see movement and turning their heads, and they realized this reaction. So this is what has occurred. It's a very interesting phenomena. You can check it. You can do it yourself. I thought about once that it would be tricky to make a piece of music with like 16, 17 hertz in there and do something low frequency, but then I thought, who wants to listen to music that makes you nauseous or makes you uneasy all the time? But it is what happens, and in our everyday life with all the electronics, and as we continue to add things that are beyond our normal realm of hearing under 20 hertz, it's something we can't perceive. We can hear noise, but the noise that's actually causing this is below that threshold. Now, a dog might hear it, so it could explain why a dog looks into a room and has an issue with the room. He's hearing this frequency, and it might be annoying him. He's looking in there, trying to figure out what he's hearing or what's happening with it. I do not know what frequency dog eyeballs vibrate at. But it is a very interesting theory, and is very much can explain why these things happen. I wish I would have known back then, because they do now have technology where they measure office buildings and places. I worked in buildings that had those weird feelings, and if you were by yourself and just sitting in there working for an hour, you'd get that uncomfortable feeling, and I always wonder if that's what it was. Today, they go into buildings and they check and measure acoustics and make changes and adapt them. And it's one of the reasons they pump some of the white noise, and they try to do things to alleviate those problems in the future. And it seems to have changed those things. But with old buildings and old wiring and who knows what else is going on, you don't know where that frequency is coming from. So unless you have one of those, whatever they are, the frequency checks, you won't know. So the frequencies below 20 hertz are generally the ones you can't hear. I think our good hearing will hear about down 21, 20 hertz, but at 17 is when this all starts up, and it's a specific one that'll affect your possible eyesight. So there you go. You got a little bit of a spooky story, but then you also got a bit of an explanation. You got a scientific theory. You can look up Vic Tandy, Tony Lawrence. You can look up Ghost in the Machine, which I did, which I thought was very cool, reading their paper. You can look at all the other subject matter on it and see. And it is interesting. And then you can explain to someone else. This can help a child. It can help other people to understand what they're possibly seeing, what's possibly happening. I know we don't all have the ability to get the equipment to check for these types of frequencies in a house, but it can alleviate someone's fears or problems with a room or something that they could find out oh, that's all it is. And then they can find a corrective measure to fix that. So there you go. Hopefully it was helpful. It wasn't as spooky as the other October stories. We'll try to find a couple and throw a couple more before the end of the year. I hope everyone had a great time at the rendezvous. I don't know yet, but I'm sure I did. Trevor, did you? Yeah, sure he did. Okay, so I hope the programs went well. We will talk about that and share some of that on the live. Maybe we'll do some updates. Maybe we'll film a little at the rendezvous and have some stuff that we present to everybody later down the line. But that being said and done, we're going to get done with this here while we're in the future, because we're back in the past, so that we can get everything together so that we can get to the rendezvous and get to when this video releases later here down the future. So see there, even in October, we time traveled in this moment, in this instance. So thank you for watching. Thank you for watching all these videos during this month and continuing to watch everything on our channel. Thank you for everything you've done, and thank you for everyone that helped out at the rendezvous in advance and in hindsight. Both at the same time. But remember, the most important thing, always to remember, whether you're here, there, in the future, or in the now, or at the rendezvous, is I'm Wayne Tuttle, you're not, and this was Chasing Legends.